Hi, Jeff and Eva. This is Joseph. I'm here to talk about this blanket chest I'm making you. It all starts off with these boards purchased at the sawmill. These trees were grown on site and sawn up. When you bring them home, you need to flatten them, or at least make them stay flat, or else they'll start cupping and warping and twisting on you. And here's the workshop in my basement. Some tools I've got here, collection of planes, and these boards are sawn in a way that are like a butterfly symmetrical. So as they're joined together, they create a book match. They're sawn in sequence and flipped from the log. These clamps here help to squeeze the joints together, and they should never come apart. Here's this marking gauge I use to measure lots of thicknesses of the boards, and you can see I'm kind of gauging it off the thickness of this board and then running a line on the edge of each of the boards in order to start dovetailing them. Here's the bevel gauge that I create a 14-degree angle and start marking them off on the board. And the neat thing about handwork is you can really choose your pattern. It doesn't have to be an exact machined look, but you can come up with all sorts of neat variations. So I'm kind of spacing them close together, and they spread apart as they go to the center of the board. Here's the small dovetail saw that I'm going to use to cut all these marks. Here's a little video to show you some the techniques and kind of labor involved. Blowing the sawdust off in order to make sure that I can see the lines properly. And let me bring the volume down on this video so it's not overdubbing in the recording here. It's pretty loud. This is my first attempt at documenting this kind of work, but it's pretty interesting. It's kind of difficult to get the right angles with no cameraman. As you can see, my basement shop is still not very finished. Got raw drywall and missing doors and things. My workbench is pretty beat up and crappy too. It's just a few pieces of OSB. There's a slightly different angle with the jiggling camera, as you can see. These two boards are ganged together, and I clamped them together so I can actually cut two boards at once, and then the patterns will be identical in each. It saves a bit of time, and it makes things a little bit more accurate. And then finally this end piece here, off on its own. You try to cut as close to the line as possible. But on these first cuts, it's really not all that necessary because the more critical connections are when you have to mark out for the pins. The coping saw here helps to remove waste in large quantities without having to chisel the entire bunch out. And try to get as close to that line as possible so that you don't have to chisel as much waste out. That's probably the most difficult technique to kind of get down, is using this coping saw. There's as close as I'm going to get, and then I'll have to start to chisel out that little extra. And there I'm wearing my my glasses for some close work. And you almost hold those chisels as if it's like a pen. It's a pretty precision instrument once you get down into the corners. Jeff would appreciate that with his precise dental work, I'm sure. It's kind of a mundane job. Slow progress, but it's the only way to do it accurately is with these chisels. The idea is to get a perfect cut up to that one line I made with that marking gauge. So you can see on the right there how perfectly lined that is. And there's all four edges of the front and back panels. This thing I'm going to use to create a slight register for which to line up my next the two sideboards in order to lay out the pins. So I'm just creating a very shallow little rabbet, they call it, just enough to feel. It's probably like less than a millimeter depth. And this tool is much more accurate than a pencil. Even the smallest of pencil leads are quite thick in comparison to that knife line. So I can get way down into the cracks and trace exactly the negative space of those tails. And then more sawing, but this time vertical. And each of these are at an angle, so I can't join two boards together because the angles would not line up. You can see the saw does pretty quick work of it. Takes a bit of practice, but you can get through these pretty fast. And very accurate as opposed to some motorized tools. And then those in-between parts are much more wide, so a coping saw saves a lot of time. And then back to the chisels. There you can see a really heavy beam of, I think it's a pecan tree or a hickory. I was using that to hold down the board, save some time from clamping. If I could just use a 50-pound chunk of wood instead. The sawmill where I purchased your cherry was had a bunch of burn piles, and this was some of the lumber that I was interested in taking for free. I might get to make something out of that, a workbench or something. And the last bit of fine-tuning here, working across, sighting down the edge of it, I can see if there's any parts protruding up that may interfere with the interlocking of these two boards. And it's alright if there's a slight, I guess, indentation. What you don't want is to have a little hill in each of these. It's better to make a little bit of a hollow, as long as you're not making those hollows visible from that marking line. And these chisels are razor sharp. They're not going to work unless you can shave with them. So So a bit of time is used to sharpen these things properly. And that's a skill that I'm finally getting a little bit better at. You can see the bit of glue there on the front edge of this board too that needs to be scraped. And here's a little square that I'm using to make sure that there's nothing above that baseline. And you want to test fit your boards before you start gluing it, because once you put the glue on, there's kind of no turning back. And they come together pretty well.